Imagine dedicating your life to building an empire, only to see it all threatened by a single decision made in a moment of arrogance. Nicholas Brooks, a powerful CEO, believed he had it all: wealth, influence, and a pristine reputation. But when a woman he thought he could simply erase from his life returns 2 decades later, bringing with her a secret that shatters his carefully constructed world, everything changes. This isn't just about a man facing the consequences of his actions. It's about a reckoning that no amount of money or power can prevent. But before we dive into the story, comment below where you're watching from today. And if you enjoy stories with unexpected twists and life-changing moments, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Nicholas Brooks was known for his ruthless business acumen. His reputation as a visionary came hand in hand with a coldness that intimidated even the most seasoned professionals. Sarah Smith, on the other hand, was a hard-working woman, dedicated, always standing out for her professionalism. When she entered Nicholas' office that day, her heart was racing. "I need to talk to you about something important, Nicholas," she began, trying to stay calm. He looked up, impatient. Those imposing office walls, adorned with awards and certificates, seemed to stifle her words. Sarah knew that what she had to say would change everything, but she had to be brave. She took a deep breath before revealing the truth. She was pregnant, and he was the father. Nicholas's reaction was immediate, but not what Sarah expected. He leaned back in his leather chair, studying her with cold eyes. "You must be joking, right?" His voice carried a venomous disbelief. To him, the news was just an inconvenience, a threat to his impeccable image. Sarah felt a lump in her throat, but held her ground. "Nicholas, we both know what happened," she replied, fighting back tears. However, he only saw a problem that needed to be eliminated before it got out of hand. Nicholas, always worried about his reputation and what others would think, didn't want to risk what he had built. Married, with a family that prided itself on a perfect image, the idea of a scandal involving an employee was unbearable. "Sarah, you know what this means, right?" he asked, not breaking eye contact. "We can't let this get out." She, still in shock from his coldness, tried to appeal to some shred of humanity. "What about the baby, Nicholas? It's your child too." But he just shook his head, frustrated. To him, Sarah and that baby were a mistake that needed to be erased. Sarah felt the ground fall from under her feet when she heard his words. "You're fired, and I suggest you don't say anything about this to anyone, for your own sake," Nicholas said, without any hesitation. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. How could he be so cruel? "But I need this job, Nicholas. I have no one else," she pleaded, but he just looked away, already bored with the conversation. The office, which once seemed merely oppressive, now turned into a suffocating nightmare. Sarah didn't want to believe that the man she once felt something for could be so heartless. The impact of those words echoed like thunder in her mind. She left the building with trembling legs, trying to process what had just happened. How could she care for a baby without a job? The reality of her situation was crushing. In an instant, all the plans, all the hopes, were destroyed. "I will get through this, I have to," she repeated to herself as she walked down the street, trying to convince herself that everything would be okay. Yet, no matter how hard she tried to keep her faith, the pain of betrayal gnawed at her. Nicholas hadn't just fired her. He had abandoned her when she needed him most. News of her dismissal spread quickly, and soon Sarah realized that Nicholas had done more than just take her job away. He had blacklisted her in the industry, making it nearly impossible to get another position. Every door she knocked on closed with an excuse. "Unfortunately, we're not hiring at the moment," they would say, but Sarah knew the truth. Nicholas was using his influence to ensure she had no other chances. It was a low blow, but she wouldn't give up. "I will fight with everything I have," she murmured, determined not to let fear take over. The days turned into weeks, and the weeks into months. Sarah faced each day with a courage she didn't even know she had. Even without a job, without prospects, she refused to succumb to despair. "I am stronger than this," she said, trying to find motivation in the small things. Her belly began to grow, and with it, her love for that little being she hadn't even met yet. She promised herself she would do everything to give her child a dignified life. And amidst all the chaos, overcoming became more than just a goal, it became a way of life. Sarah's perseverance impressed everyone around her. Friends and family offered help, but she insisted on standing firm, fighting on her own. "I don't want to depend on anyone. I'll show my child that they have a strong mother," she explained, with a smile that hid the pain. The ultrasound on the fridge was a constant reminder that she had a greater reason to keep going. That little being, forming inside her, gave her the strength to face any challenge. And each interview, each no, only increased her determination. She knew that, eventually, the right door would open. Meanwhile, Nicholas went on with his life as if nothing had happened. He got involved in new business, events, and parties, maintaining his impeccable image. But now and then, the image of Sarah, devastated, came to his mind. He quickly dismissed it, convinced he had done what needed to be done. She should never have gotten involved in this, he thought, justifying his actions. However, a slight discomfort remained, a small crack in his perfect facade. Nicholas ignored it, believing he could move on without consequences. But life, with its unexpected twists, still had much to teach him. In the most challenging moments, Sarah found comfort in faith. Not blind faith, but faith in herself, in her ability to win, to overcome any obstacle. "Nothing is impossible," she repeated, inspired by stories of other women who also faced hardships and managed to rise above. She read books on overcoming adversity, seeking inspiration in every line. And although the pain was still there, along with the hurt, hope began to grow again. No matter how dark the path, she knew there was light at the end of the tunnel. And she was determined to find it. Sarah, through tears and smiles, began to plan the future. She knew it wouldn't be easy, but nothing worthwhile in life was simple. Every day was a battle, but also a victory. "When my child is born, they will have a mother who never gave up," she said to herself, feeling the weight of responsibility but also a strange joy. Because deep down, she knew she was growing, transforming into a stronger person. And this transformation, this strength born from each defeat, was something Nicholas would never understand. She was slowly building a new future. But the truth is, some wounds take time to heal. Sarah knew she had to leave the past behind, but forgiveness was difficult. Forgiving Nicholas seemed impossible. "How do you forgive someone who destroyed your life?" she asked herself. However, each day, she realized that holding on to resentment only hurt her more. It wasn't about him, it was about her, about freeing herself. "I need to move on," she decided, aware that forgiveness would be a long and painful process. But she was willing to try because she knew that only then could she make room for love, for compassion, and for a lighter future. And while Sarah faced her daily struggles, Nicholas, without realizing it, was about to be confronted with the truth. That secret, guarded so carefully, would not remain hidden forever. Fate has a peculiar way of bringing to light what we try so hard to conceal. And soon, the twist he never imagined would become a reality. Because the truth, no matter how painful, always finds a way to surface, revealing the darkest secrets. And for Nicholas, this revelation would bring consequences he could never have foreseen. After being dismissed and blacklisted by Nicholas, Sarah found herself in a situation she never imagined. Alone, pregnant, and without a job, she faced a cruel reality. Every day felt like climbing a mountain, with obstacles at every step. "I have to stay strong, for the baby," she whispered, looking at herself in the mirror, trying to summon the courage that seemed to be slipping away. The once vibrant, confident woman now found herself questioning everything. She sent out countless resumes, hoping for a chance, but rejection became her new normal. It was as if the world had turned its back on her, but she refused to give up. Ethan, her unborn child, became her source of strength. "We're going to get through this, little one," she would say, gently rubbing her growing belly. It was a bond that no one could break, not even Nicholas with all his power and influence. Sarah knew that being blacklisted meant more than just losing a job. It was a mark, a scarlet letter, and it seemed that every employer in the industry was avoiding her like the plague. "We're stronger than this," she reminded herself daily, her resolve solidifying with each rejection. It wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about proving that she could rise above everything thrown at her. Despite the harshness of her situation, Sarah's spirit refused to be completely crushed. She began to look for work outside her field, applying for anything that could provide for her and Ethan. It didn't matter if it was beneath her qualifications. "A job is a job," she told herself, determined to keep moving forward. But even in this search, she faced discrimination. Some employers, seeing her pregnant belly, hesitated. Others outright rejected her, claiming they didn't want to deal with maternity leave. It was a bitter pill to swallow, but Sarah, with her unyielding courage, pressed on, believing that something would come through. Her friends and family, though supportive, couldn't truly understand the depth of her struggle. They offered words of encouragement and sympathy, but Sarah knew this was a battle she had to fight on her own. "You're a warrior, Sarah," her best friend would say, trying to lift her spirits. And while the words were meant to encourage, they sometimes felt hollow against the harshness of her reality. Because no one could fight this battle for her. Every sleepless night, every anxious morning was a reminder that her life had changed irrevocably. Yet, despite everything, there was a spark of hope she refused to let die. Sarah began attending support groups for single mothers, hoping to find solace and maybe even some practical advice. Listening to other women's stories, she realized she wasn't alone in her struggle. There were so many others, facing similar or even worse situations, yet they continued to fight, to push forward. "If they can do it, so can I," she thought, feeling a renewed sense of determination. It wasn't just about getting through the day anymore. It was about building a future for her son, a future that would be filled with love, not bitterness. And that realization gave her a new purpose, a new drive. With this newfound resolve, Sarah decided to use the time she had to better herself. She enrolled in online courses, learning new skills that could open different career paths. "I'm not going to let him win," she said, thinking of Nicholas and his attempt to ruin her life. She spent nights studying, often with tears of exhaustion, but she kept going. Because it wasn't just about her anymore. It was about Ethan and the life she wanted to give him. She knew that one day, she would have to explain everything to him. And when that day came, she wanted to be able to say, "I never gave up, no matter how hard it got." As months passed, Sarah started to see some light at the end of the tunnel. She landed a part-time job at a small local business. It wasn't glamorous, and it certainly wasn't what she had envisioned for herself, but it was something. "It's a start," she told herself, grateful for the opportunity. Her colleagues were kind and supportive, and for the first time in a long while, she felt a sense of belonging again. "You're doing great," her boss said one day, noticing her dedication and hard work. And those words, simple as they were, felt like a balm to her wounded spirit. The job, though modest, gave Sarah a sense of purpose she hadn't felt in a long time. She began to believe in herself again, little by little. Each paycheck, no matter how small, was a victory, a step towards independence. She saved every penny she could, planning for Ethan's arrival. There were days when she still felt overwhelmed, when the weight of the past bore down on her shoulders. But every time she thought of giving up, she would feel Ethan's little kicks, reminding her of why she was fighting. "We're going to be okay," she whispered, and in those moments, she truly believed it. Yet, despite her progress, Sarah couldn't shake the fear that Nicholas might come back into her life. What if he tried to take Ethan away? The thought haunted her, keeping her awake at night. She knew how powerful he was, how he could bend things to his will. "I won't let him," she swore, her protective instincts kicking in. She started researching her legal rights, determined to be prepared for any eventuality. If Nicholas thought he could control her and her son, he was mistaken. Sarah was no longer the scared woman who had left his office months ago. She was stronger, and she was ready to fight for her child. As Ethan's due date approached, Sarah's excitement grew. Despite everything, the thought of holding her son in her arms filled her with a joy she couldn't describe. She began preparing their small apartment, decorating it with love and care. "This is our little sanctuary," she said, imagining all the happy moments they would share. Every detail, from the crib to the tiny clothes, was chosen with the utmost care. And as she folded each piece of clothing, she whispered, "We're going to have such a beautiful life together." It was a promise to herself and to Ethan, a vow to make up for everything they had lost. The day Ethan was born was a day Sarah would never forget. It was as if all the pain, all the struggle, had led to this perfect moment. Holding him in her arms, she felt an overwhelming wave of love and compassion. "You're here, my love," she murmured, tears streaming down her face. It was a new beginning, a fresh start for both of them. All the fear, all the anger, seemed to melt away as she looked into his eyes. In that moment, nothing else mattered. Not Nicholas, not the past. Only the future, bright and hopeful, lay before them. But Sarah knew that the battle wasn't over. Raising Ethan alone would be challenging, but she was ready. She had faced so much already and had come out stronger. "We're going to make it," she whispered to Ethan, feeling more determined than ever. She would teach him about courage, about perseverance, about love and forgiveness. She would show him that no matter how dark things seemed, there was always a way forward. And she would do it all with a heart full of love, knowing that every sacrifice, every struggle, was worth it. Because Ethan was worth it. Months passed, and Sarah settled into her new life as a single mother. It wasn't easy, but every time she saw Ethan smile, she knew she was on the right path. The world that once seemed so cruel and unforgiving was now filled with small moments of joy and beauty. "We're doing great, aren't we?" she would say, cradling Ethan in her arms. And in those quiet moments, she felt a peace she hadn't known in a long time. It was a hard-won peace, born from pain and perseverance. And though the scars of the past would always be there, they no longer defined her. But deep down, Sarah knew that one day, Ethan would ask about his father. It was a conversation she dreaded, one she wasn't sure how to navigate. How could she explain everything without tainting his perception of the world? "I'll figure it out," she said, trying to reassure herself. She wanted Ethan to grow up knowing the truth but not burdened by it. He deserved to know who his father was, but he also deserved to live free from the shadow of Nicholas's mistakes. And when that day came, she would be ready. Ready to tell him the story of their struggle, their strength, and their victory over adversity. 20 years had passed since Sarah's struggle began, and her son Ethan was now a young man filled with ambition and hope. His first day at Pioneer Solutions was a momentous occasion, a chance to prove himself in the corporate world. "I've got this, Mom," he said confidently that morning, adjusting his tie in the mirror. Sarah's heart was both full of pride and weighed down with unspoken fears. She had never told Ethan about Nicholas, and seeing him step into the very company owned by his father brought back a flood of memories she had long buried. But she forced a smile. "I know you do, sweetheart. You'll be amazing." As Ethan entered the towering glass building, a sense of excitement and nervousness washed over him. He had worked hard to get this opportunity, determined to make a name for himself. What he didn't know was that the path he was about to walk was riddled with hidden connections and truths that would soon unravel. As he made his way through the sleek, modern office space, he felt a strange mixture of awe and unease. Something about the place felt both familiar and foreign. "This is it," he thought, taking a deep breath. He had no idea that his presence would stir echoes of a past he knew nothing about. Ethan's introduction to the team went smoothly. Everyone seemed welcoming, curious about the new intern with an impressive resume. As he shook hands and exchanged pleasantries, he noticed a few lingering glances when he introduced himself. "Ethan Smith," he repeated, watching the subtle flickers of recognition in their eyes. But he brushed it off, attributing it to first-day jitters. "Maybe they've heard about me," he thought optimistically. What he didn't realize was that his surname, a remnant of a painful past, held a significance far beyond what he could comprehend. For now, he was just eager to make a good impression. Meanwhile, Nicholas Brooks, still the powerful CEO of Pioneer Solutions, was in a meeting when he heard about the new intern. He barely glanced at the information before approving the application weeks earlier. But as he flipped through the roster now, a name caught his eye. "Ethan Smith," he murmured, pausing. The name tugged at something buried deep in his memory, but he couldn't place it. With a dismissive shrug, he moved on. There were more important things to focus on. Little did he know, the past was about to collide with the present in a way that would upend everything he thought he knew. As the day progressed, Ethan found himself settling into the rhythm of the office. He met with his supervisor, attended orientation sessions, and familiarized himself with the company's operations. Yet, there was an undercurrent of tension he couldn't quite shake. It was as if the building itself was alive with whispers, with unspoken words lingering in the air. During a break, he caught sight of Nicholas through the glass walls of the executive office. The sight of the man, commanding and authoritative, sent a chill down his spine. He couldn't explain it, but something about Nicholas felt strangely intimidating, almost personal. The feeling of unease grew stronger when, later in the day, Ethan was summoned to Nicholas's office. His heart raced as he made his way down the pristine corridors. "Why does he want to see me?" Ethan wondered, his mind spinning with possibilities. He had done nothing wrong, nothing to warrant attention from the CEO himself. As he entered the office, Nicholas looked up from his desk, his expression unreadable. "Mr. Brooks, it's an honor to meet you," Ethan began, his voice steady despite his nerves. Nicholas nodded, his gaze lingering on Ethan's face, searching for something, but what? For a moment, there was silence, thick and almost suffocating. "Ethan, where did you say you were from?" Nicholas asked, his tone casual, but his eyes sharp. From here, sir." "Born and raised," Ethan replied, a bit taken aback. Nicholas nodded slowly, as if piecing together a puzzle. "And your parents? What do they do?" The question seemed innocent enough, but Ethan hesitated. "My mom raised me on her own. She's a strong woman, worked really hard to give me a good life," he said, pride and admiration evident in his voice. Nicholas's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes, a flicker of recognition, perhaps? Ethan left the office with a head full of questions and a heart heavy with confusion. There was something about the way Nicholas had looked at him, the way he had asked those questions, that didn't sit right. Why would he care about my background? He wondered. The whole encounter felt surreal, almost like a scene from a movie where the protagonist discovers a hidden truth about their past. But that was ridiculous, wasn't it? Shaking off the thought, he tried to focus on his work, but the strange tension lingered, making it hard to concentrate. It was as if something was pulling him toward a revelation he wasn't ready to face. Back at home, Sarah paced the living room, unable to shake the anxiety that had been gnawing at her all day. She knew Ethan's first day would be challenging, but she hadn't anticipated this level of worry. "Maybe I should have told him everything," she muttered, feeling the weight of the secret she had kept for so long. But how could she? How could she tell her son that the man he admired from afar was the same man who had abandoned them? As the minutes ticked by, she prayed silently, hoping that fate would be kind and that the truth would remain buried. But deep down, she knew secrets like theirs never stayed hidden forever. When Ethan finally returned home, Sarah tried to read his face, searching for any sign of distress. "How was your first day, honey?" she asked, keeping her voice light. Ethan hesitated, then shrugged. "It was fine, I guess. Met a lot of people, got a lot to learn." He paused, then added, "I even met Nicholas Brooks." The casualness of his tone did nothing to mask the curiosity in his eyes. Sarah's heart skipped a beat, her smile faltering for just a second. "Did you now? What did you think of him?" she asked, her voice trembling despite her efforts to stay calm. "I don't know. He's intense," Ethan replied, frowning. The conversation lingered in Sarah's mind long after Ethan went to bed. She couldn't shake the feeling that things were starting to unravel, that the careful life she had built was on the verge of crumbling. "Maybe it's just my imagination," she told herself, but the fear gnawed at her. She knew Nicholas well enough to understand that he wouldn't let something like this slide if he discovered the truth. "I have to keep Ethan away from him," she decided, but the thought of pulling him out of the internship he had worked so hard for broke her heart. It was a delicate balance, one she wasn't sure she could maintain. The next few days at work were a blur for Ethan. He threw himself into his tasks, trying to shake off the unsettling encounter with Nicholas. But every now and then, he would catch the CEO's gaze lingering on him, as if studying him. It made Ethan uneasy, but he couldn't pinpoint why. "Am I doing something wrong?" he asked himself repeatedly. His colleagues noticed his distraction, but he brushed off their concerns with a smile and a joke. "Just first-week jitters, I guess," he'd say, but deep down, he knew it was more than that. It was as if he was standing on the edge of something huge, and he had no idea what lay below. One afternoon, as Ethan was organizing files, he stumbled upon an old photograph in a dusty folder. It was a company event, taken years ago. In the background, barely noticeable, was a younger Nicholas, his arm around a woman Ethan didn't recognize. There was something familiar about her, though, something that tugged at his memory. He turned the photo over, looking for a name or a date, but found nothing. "Who is she?" he wondered, a strange sense of déjà vu washing over him. For some reason, he couldn't shake the feeling that this woman was connected to him, to his past. But how? Ethan's curiosity was piqued, but he knew better than to start asking questions right away. Instead, he decided to do some digging on his own. He searched through the company's archives, looking for any mention of the woman in the photo. Hours passed, and just as he was about to give up, he found a name, Sarah Smith. His heart skipped a beat. Could it be? He whispered to himself. He knew his mother had worked in the corporate world before he was born, but she never talked about it. Is this why she was so uneasy about me working here? The pieces were starting to fall into place, but the picture they formed was one he wasn't sure he wanted to see. As Ethan's second week at Pioneer Solutions began, the strange tension he felt only seemed to intensify. Everywhere he went, he noticed the subtle, almost imperceptible glances from his colleagues. It was as if they were piecing together a puzzle he couldn't see. "Am I doing something wrong?" he wondered, the question gnawing at him. But each time he asked, people reassured him, "You're doing great, Ethan. Just keep up the good work." Yet, their smiles felt strained, their eyes lingering on him a moment too long. The unease was growing, feeding off the silence and the secrets he sensed all around him. One afternoon, as he was organizing files in the company's archives, Ethan stumbled upon another photograph, an old corporate event. His eyes widened as he recognized his mother, Sarah, standing in the background. She looked younger, but there was no mistaking her face. His heart raced. "What is she doing here?" he whispered, confusion and curiosity battling for dominance. He turned the photo over, but there was no information, no date or names. His hands trembled slightly as he placed the photo back, his mind whirling with questions. Did she work here? Why hadn't she ever mentioned it? Unable to shake the image from his mind, Ethan decided to confront his mother that evening. "Mom, I need to ask you something," he began cautiously, holding back the photo like a card in a high-stakes game. Sarah looked up, her heart instantly on high alert. "What is it, honey?" she asked, forcing a smile, but the fear was already creeping in. Ethan hesitated, then took a deep breath. "Did you ever work at Pioneer Solutions?" The question hung in the air, heavy and charged. Sarah's face paled, and for a moment she seemed to freeze. "Why do you ask that?" Her voice was a whisper, her mind racing. Ethan's heart sank as he saw the look on her face. "I found this picture," he said, showing her the photo. "You're in it. Why didn't you ever tell me?" The truth was on the tip of her tongue, but Sarah couldn't bring herself to say it. How could she explain that the very company he now worked for was run by the man who had abandoned them? "It was a long time ago, Ethan," she finally managed, her voice shaky. "I didn't think it mattered anymore." But she could see in his eyes that this wasn't enough. He needed answers, and she wasn't ready to give them. Not yet. The next day, Ethan returned to work with a mind full of doubts and a heart heavy with confusion. Every corner of the office seemed to hold a secret he couldn't uncover, every glance from his colleagues a reminder of something hidden just out of reach. "Why didn't she tell me?" he thought, frustration simmering beneath the surface. He wanted to ask more, to dig deeper, but something held him back. It was as if he was standing at the edge of a cliff, looking down into an abyss he wasn't sure he was ready to face. And Nicholas was the key to everything. As fate would have it, that very day, Nicholas called Ethan into his office again. The tension was palpable as Ethan stepped inside, the door closing behind him like a seal on his fate. "Ethan," Nicholas began, his tone measured, "I wanted to talk to you about something." He paused, his eyes boring into Ethan's with an intensity that made his skin prickle. "Your work has been impressive so far. But I can't shake this feeling that there's more to your story." Ethan's heart pounded in his chest. Was Nicholas fishing for information? Did he suspect something? "I'm just here to do my job, sir," he replied, his voice steady, but his mind racing. Nicholas leaned back, his gaze never leaving Ethan's face. "You know, you remind me of someone I used to know," he said slowly, almost as if testing the waters. Ethan stiffened, every muscle in his body taut with anticipation. "Who?" he asked, his voice barely more than a whisper. Nicholas didn't answer immediately, his eyes narrowing as if trying to see through Ethan, to peel back layers he didn't know existed. "Someone from a long time ago," he finally said, his voice carrying a strange mix of nostalgia and regret. Ethan swallowed hard, the tension in the room nearly suffocating. What was Nicholas trying to say? Ethan left the office more confused than ever. Nicholas's words echoed in his mind, each syllable like a riddle he couldn't solve. "Who do I remind him of?" he thought, the question looping endlessly in his mind. Every theory he came up with seemed more impossible than the last. He thought about asking his colleagues, but something held him back. It was as if there was an unspoken rule, a silence that everyone agreed to keep. The tension was almost unbearable, and he felt like he was walking through a maze where every turn led to more questions, more confusion. Back at home, Sarah could feel the storm brewing. Ethan was distant, his questions more pointed, his curiosity sharper. "He's getting closer," she thought, panic bubbling up. She wanted to protect him, to shield him from the painful truth, but she knew she couldn't keep the secret forever. "I'm sorry, Ethan," she whispered to herself, her heart aching with the weight of everything unsaid. She thought about all the time she had almost told him, all the nights she lay awake, wondering if keeping the truth from him was a mistake. But now, as the pieces were coming together, she realized it was only a matter of time. The days passed in a tense blur. Ethan's performance at work was still strong, but his mind was elsewhere. He couldn't stop thinking about Nicholas, about the strange feeling he got every time their paths crossed. It was as if there was an invisible thread connecting them, pulling them closer to some inevitable confrontation. And then, one evening, as he was leaving the office, he overheard a conversation between two senior employees. "Did you hear about the new intern?" one of them whispered. "Yeah, he looks just like her. Do you think he knows?" Ethan's blood ran cold. "Like who?" he wanted to shout, but he forced himself to stay calm, listening intently. That night, Ethan couldn't sleep. His mind was racing, piecing together fragments of conversations, stolen glances, and his own suspicions. "Who am I to him?" he wondered, staring at the ceiling. He thought about the way Nicholas looked at him, the questions he had asked, the strange tension that seemed to hang over every interaction. What if? He hesitated, the thought almost too wild to entertain. But it wouldn't leave him alone. What if he knows my mom? The idea was both thrilling and terrifying. If it were true, it would change everything he thought he knew about his life, about his family. The next morning, Ethan decided to take matters into his own hands. He knew he had to find out more about his mother's time at Pioneer Solutions. He needed answers, and he wasn't going to wait for them to come to him. He started going through old company records, searching for any mention of Sarah Smith. It was a tedious task, but he was relentless. "I'll find out the truth," he vowed, his determination unwavering. And then, finally, he found it, a list of former employees from 20 years ago. There it was, Sarah Smith, administrative assistant. His hands shook as he stared at the name. "It's real," he whispered. "She worked here." Ethan's discovery was both a relief and a burden. He had proof now, proof that his mother had been part of this place, that she had a history here. But why had she never told him? And what did Nicholas have to do with all of this? He knew he couldn't confront her again without more information. So, he kept digging, trying to piece together a puzzle that seemed to have too many missing pieces. And all the while, the tension at work only grew. It was like a ticking time bomb, each second bringing him closer to an explosion he wasn't sure he was ready for. At the end of that week, Ethan found himself standing outside Nicholas's office once again. His heart was pounding, but this time it wasn't fear, it was resolve. He knocked and entered, his eyes meeting Nicholas's with a steadiness he hadn't felt before. "Mr. Brooks, can I ask you something?" he began, his voice calm but firm. Nicholas looked up, surprised by the shift in Ethan's demeanor. "Of course, Ethan. What's on your mind?" Ethan took a deep breath, bracing himself for what was to come. "Did you know my mother, Sarah Smith?" The question hung in the air, the tension crackling like electricity. And in that moment, everything changed. Ethan's question hung in the air, a stark challenge that took Nicholas by surprise. For a moment, the room was silent, the only sound the faint hum of the office beyond. Nicholas's eyes widened as the pieces began to fall into place. "Sarah Smith," he repeated, almost to himself, as if testing the name on his tongue. Memories, long buried and carefully hidden, surfaced with startling clarity. He remembered the young woman he had once been involved with, the one he had so cruelly dismissed. And now, here stood her son, demanding answers. "Ethan," he said slowly, choosing his words carefully. "Yes, I knew your mother." Ethan felt a rush of emotions at Nicholas's words: shock, anger, confusion. He had expected something, but not this. "You knew her," he echoed, his voice shaking. "Why didn't she ever tell me?" Nicholas hesitated, the weight of his past actions pressing down on him like a heavy stone. I don't know," he admitted, his usual confidence faltering. For the first time in years, he felt genuinely uncertain. How could he explain what had happened? How could he justify the choices he made all those years ago? Ethan's gaze never wavered, his eyes searching Nicholas's for answers, for truth. The tension in the room was palpable, an almost tangible force pressing in on both men. Nicholas took a deep breath, trying to collect his thoughts. "Your mother and we worked together. We were close for a time," he began, struggling to find the right words. "But things got complicated. I made some choices that I'm not proud of." Ethan's jaw tightened, his heart pounding in his chest. "What kind of choices?" he demanded, his voice a mix of hurt and anger. Nicholas looked away, shame and regret etched on his face. I let her down. I let both of you down." Ethan's mind was spinning. He had come looking for answers, but the truth was more than he could have ever imagined. "So, you just left her?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. Nicholas nodded, the guilt almost suffocating. "Yes. I was a different man back then, Ethan. I was selfish, arrogant. I thought I could just walk away and there would be no consequences." He paused, his eyes meeting Ethan's. "But I was wrong. I see that now." Ethan clenched his fists, struggling to process everything. This man, this stranger, had not only abandoned his mother, but had also tried to erase them from his life. How could he ever forgive that? The reality of what Nicholas was saying hit Ethan like a punch to the gut. He stumbled back, needing to put distance between himself and this man who had so carelessly destroyed his mother's life. "You think saying you were wrong changes anything?" he asked, his voice shaking with barely controlled rage. Nicholas's face twisted in pain. "No, I know it doesn't. But I don't know what else to say." For once, he was at a loss, the words that always came so easily now failing him. Ethan's world felt like it was spinning out of control, the ground shifting beneath his feet. Ethan turned on his heel and stormed out of the office, his mind a chaotic whirlwind of thoughts and emotions. He needed to get away, to breathe, to think. How could his mother have kept this from him? Why didn't she tell him the truth about Nicholas, about everything? He could barely see where he was going as he rushed down the hall, his vision blurred with unshed tears. His colleagues turned to watch him, concern and confusion etched on their faces, but he ignored them all. He felt like he was drowning, like the air had been sucked out of the room. He needed answers, but he wasn't sure he could handle what he had just learned. When Ethan finally got home, he found Sarah waiting for him, her face lined with worry. "Ethan, what happened?" she asked, her voice trembling. He didn't know where to start, how to even begin to explain what he had discovered. "You knew," he said finally, his voice breaking. "You knew who he was, and you never told me." Sarah's heart sank. This was the moment she had feared, the one she had tried so desperately to avoid. "Ethan, please, let me explain," she began, but he held up a hand, cutting her off. "Explain what?" "That you lied to me my whole life. That the man I work for is the same man who abandoned us." Tears welled up in Sarah's eyes, but she forced herself to stay calm. "I didn't lie to you, Ethan. I didn't know how to tell you," she said, her voice breaking. "I wanted to protect you, to keep you from getting hurt." But her words felt hollow, even to her own ears. Ethan shook his head, disbelief and betrayal written all over his face. "Protect me? You let me walk right into his company without warning me. How is that protecting me?" He felt like his whole world was crumbling around him, every truth he had ever known suddenly twisted and broken. "I'm sorry, Ethan," Sarah whispered, her voice choked with emotion. "I thought I was doing the right thing. I thought it was better for you not to know." Ethan's heart ached as he looked at her, the pain in her eyes mirroring his own. "I can't believe this," he muttered, shaking his head. "I can't believe you kept this from me." He turned away, his thoughts a jumbled mess. He had always trusted his mother, believed in her. And now, to find out that she had hidden something so huge from him, it felt like a betrayal deeper than he could have ever imagined. Sarah reached out, desperate to make him understand. "Ethan, please. I love you. I did what I thought was best." But Ethan pulled away, anger and hurt boiling over. "You did what was best for you, not for me," he snapped, his voice raw with pain. "You kept me in the dark. You let me build a life without knowing who I really am. How could you do that?" Sarah's tears finally spilled over, her heart breaking as she saw the anguish on her son's face. "I'm so sorry, Ethan," she whispered, but the words felt empty, powerless against the storm raging inside him. Ethan felt like he was suffocating. He needed to get out, to get away from the lies, the pain, the anger. Without another word, he turned and walked out the door, the slam echoing through the house. Sarah collapsed onto the couch, her body shaking with sobs. She had known this day would come, but she hadn't expected it to hurt this much. "What have I done?" she whispered to the empty room, her heart breaking all over again. She had tried to protect Ethan, but now it seemed like all she had done was push him away. And the thought of losing him, of losing the one thing she had fought so hard to keep, was more than she could bear. Outside, Ethan felt the cool night air hit his face like a splash of cold water. He walked aimlessly, his mind racing. How could his mother do this? How could Nicholas just walk back into his life and expect everything to be okay? He didn't know what to do, where to go. All he knew was that he couldn't go back, not yet. He needed time, space, a chance to breathe and think. But no matter how far he walked, the questions followed him, the anger simmering just beneath the surface. He felt lost, adrift in a sea of emotions he couldn't control. Ethan finally stopped at a small park, sinking onto a bench as the weight of everything crashed down on him. He buried his face in his hands, feeling more alone than ever before. How could his life have changed so drastically in such a short time? Just days ago, he had been excited about his new job, about the future. Now, everything felt broken, shattered. He didn't know how to move forward, how to make sense of anything. All he knew was that his trust, in both his mother and Nicholas, had been shaken to its core. And he wasn't sure if it could ever be repaired. Determined to confront Nicholas and get the answers he desperately needed, Ethan made a plan. He knew where Nicholas frequented, a high-end restaurant downtown, a place for the elite to wine and dine. The thought of confronting him there, in front of everyone, filled Ethan with a strange mix of fear and exhilaration. He wanted to see the man who had turned his life upside down squirm, to expose him for who he really was. "I need to do this," he whispered to himself, his resolve hardening. The time for secrets and half-truths was over. It was time for Nicholas to face the consequences of his actions. As Ethan walked into the restaurant, the elegant surroundings seemed almost surreal. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling, and the soft murmur of conversation filled the air. He spotted Nicholas almost immediately, seated at a table near the window, his wife and son beside him. They looked like the perfect family, smiling and laughing, oblivious to the storm about to hit. Ethan's heart pounded as he approached, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. He had rehearsed what he would say 100 times, but now, standing there, the words felt heavy and jumbled in his mind. "Just breathe," he told himself. "You've got this." Nicholas looked up as Ethan approached, his expression shifting from surprise to confusion. "Ethan, what are you doing here?" he asked, his voice polite but tinged with annoyance. Ethan didn't hesitate. "I'm here to talk to you, Nicholas. About my mother. About you." The words were like a slap, silencing the table. Nicholas's wife, Lisa, frowned, her eyes darting between the two men. "Nicholas, what's going on?" she asked, a hint of worry in her voice. Their son, David, looked equally bewildered. Ethan took a deep breath, his gaze never leaving Nicholas's. "I'm your son, Nicholas. You abandoned me and my mother." The shock on Nicholas's face was almost satisfying. He blinked, his mouth opening and closing as he struggled to find his voice. "That's not true," he finally managed, his voice shaking. "I didn't know." But Ethan cut him off, his anger boiling over. "You didn't know. You knew exactly what you were doing. You left us with nothing while you continued your perfect life." His voice rose, drawing the attention of nearby diners. Lisa's face paled as she realized what Ethan was saying. "Nicholas, is this true?" she whispered, her voice trembling. David looked at his father, confusion turning to anger. "Dad, what is he talking about?" The restaurant fell silent as the confrontation unfolded, every eye fixed on their table. Ethan could feel the weight of everyone's stares, but he didn't care. All that mattered was making Nicholas face what he had done. "You think you can just walk away from this?" he demanded, his voice thick with emotion. "You think you can pretend like we don't exist?" Nicholas shook his head, his composure slipping. "Ethan, please, let's talk about this somewhere else," he pleaded, but Ethan stood his ground. "No. We're talking about it here, now. In front of everyone." The words were a challenge, and Nicholas knew it. Lisa turned to Nicholas, her eyes brimming with tears. "How could you do this, Nicholas?" she asked, her voice breaking. "How could you keep something like this from us?" Nicholas reached out, trying to take her hand, but she pulled away, her expression filled with hurt and disbelief. "I didn't know, Lisa," he insisted, desperation creeping into his voice. But even as he said it, he knew it was a lie. He had known, deep down, that his actions would have consequences. He just never thought they would catch up to him like this, in such a public and humiliating way. David stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. "I can't believe this," he said, his voice cold. "You're a liar. You've been lying to us all." The anger in his eyes was unmistakable, and for a moment, Nicholas felt a pang of fear. "David, please, let's talk about this at home," he said, his voice shaking. But David shook his head, his face set in a hard, unforgiving mask. "No, Dad. We're talking about it here. Just like he said." He glanced at Ethan, his gaze filled with a strange mix of sympathy and anger. "You deserve to be heard," he said softly. "We all do." Ethan was taken aback by David's words. He hadn't expected this, hadn't expected to find an ally in Nicholas's son. "Thank you," he said, his voice cracking. He turned back to Nicholas, his anger flaring again. "You ruined my mother's life, and for what? To protect your precious reputation." Nicholas looked away, shame flooding his face. "I was scared," he said quietly, his voice barely audible. "I didn't know what to do. I thought it would be better for everyone if I just walked away." Ethan's laugh was bitter, harsh. "Better for everyone? You mean better for you? You didn't care about us." Lisa's sobs broke the tense silence. "I don't know who you are anymore, Nicholas," she whispered, her voice filled with pain. "How could you do this to us?" "To him." Nicholas reached out, but she flinched away, her eyes filled with betrayal. "Lisa, please," he begged, but she shook her head, standing up. "I need to get out of here," she said, her voice shaking. She looked at David, her eyes pleading. "Come on, let's go." David hesitated, his gaze lingering on Ethan. "I'm sorry," he said softly, before turning and following his mother out of the restaurant, leaving Nicholas alone with Ethan. Nicholas looked at Ethan, his eyes filled with a sadness that almost made Ethan pity him. "I know I messed up," he said quietly. "I know I hurt you and your mother. But I'm asking you now, please, let me make it right." Ethan shook his head, his anger flaring again. "You can't make it right. You can't undo what you did." Nicholas's shoulders slumped, defeat written all over his face. "I know. But I want to try. Please, give me a chance." Ethan's heart twisted. He had come here to confront Nicholas, to make him pay for what he had done. But now, seeing the man so broken, so full of regret, he wasn't sure what to feel. The silence between them stretched on, heavy and thick. Ethan took a deep breath, trying to find the words that wouldn't come. "You think saying sorry is going to fix this?" he asked, his voice breaking. "You think you can just apologize and everything will be okay?" Nicholas shook his head, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. "No. I know it won't. But I want to be part of your life, Ethan. I want to try and be the father I should have been." Ethan's heart ached at the words. He had spent his whole life hating this man, blaming him for everything. And now, he didn't know what to do. Ethan looked around the restaurant, at the people watching them, their expressions a mix of pity and curiosity. He felt exposed, raw, like a wound laid bare for all to see. "I don't know what you want from me," he said finally, his voice trembling. "I don't know if I can ever forgive you for what you did." Nicholas nodded, his face a mask of pain. "I understand. And I don't expect you to. But I'm asking you to give me a chance, to let me try." Ethan's chest tightened. He had come here looking for closure, but now he felt more lost than ever. Finally, Ethan took a step back, his heart heavy. "I need time," he said, his voice barely more than a whisper. "I need to think." Nicholas nodded, his expression one of profound sadness. "Take all the time you need," he said softly. "I'll be here, whenever you're ready." Ethan turned and walked away, the weight of everything that had happened pressing down on him like a leaden cloak. He didn't know what the future held, didn't know if he could ever forgive Nicholas. But as he stepped out into the cool night air, he felt a strange, fragile sense of hope. Maybe, just maybe, there was a way forward after all. The confrontation at the restaurant spread like wildfire. Within hours, the news was everywhere, on social media, in the tabloids, and on every gossip site. "CEO of Pioneer Solutions exposed in family scandal," the headline screamed. Nicholas's world, once so carefully controlled and curated, was now unraveling at an alarming pace. He watched in horror as his reputation, his carefully built image, crumbled before his eyes. It was as if the entire world was watching, judging, and condemning him. He knew there was no escaping this, no way to hide from the consequences of his actions. The empire he had spent decades building was on the verge of collapse. The board of directors, always so supportive, now turned against him. An emergency meeting was called, and Nicholas found himself standing before them, facing their cold, accusing stares. "We can't have this kind of scandal associated with the company," one of them said, his voice dripping with disdain. "It's bad for business. Our stock is plummeting." Nicholas tried to defend himself, tried to explain that he had made mistakes but was willing to make amends. But the board members were unmoved. To them, he was no longer the brilliant leader who had guided the company to success. He was a liability, a stain that needed to be removed. It didn't take long for them to reach a decision. Nicholas was asked to step down as CEO, effective immediately. The news hit him like a physical blow, leaving him stunned and reeling. "You can't do this," he said, his voice shaking with desperation. "I built this company. It's mine." But his words fell on deaf ears. "We can and we are," the chairman replied coldly. "It's for the good of the company." Nicholas felt a surge of anger and helplessness. Everything he had worked for, everything he had sacrificed, was slipping through his fingers, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. The announcement of his resignation was made public the same day. The media, always hungry for drama, pounced on the story with relentless fervor. "Nicholas Brooks resigns amid scandal," the headlines blared. His face was splashed across every screen, every front page, accompanied by words like disgrace and downfall. Nicholas watched it all unfold from the solitude of his home, his heart heavy with a despair he had never felt before. This was more than just a professional failure, it was a personal one. He had lost everything, his family, his career, his reputation. And the worst part was, he knew he had no one to blame but himself. As the days passed, the reality of his situation sank in. He was no longer Nicholas Brooks, the powerful CEO. He was just a man, alone and broken, struggling to make sense of the wreckage of his life. He reached out to Lisa and David, desperate to make amends, but they wouldn't take his calls. "You've hurt us enough, Nicholas," Lisa had said the last time they spoke. "We need time." Her words echoed in his mind, each one a sharp reminder of how deeply he had wounded the people he loved most. He had thought he could control everything, but now he saw how wrong he had been. With nowhere else to turn, Nicholas tried to reach out to Ethan. He sent messages, called, but there was no response. "Please, Ethan, I just want to talk," he pleaded in a voicemail, his voice breaking with emotion. But the silence that followed was deafening. Nicholas felt a pang of guilt and regret so intense it took his breath away. He had spent his life chasing success, believing that power and wealth were the measures of a man. But now, stripped of everything, he saw the truth. None of it mattered. Not the money, not the accolades. All that mattered were the relationships he had destroyed, the people he had failed. Ethan, meanwhile, was struggling with his own turmoil. The public spectacle of his father's downfall had been overwhelming. Everywhere he went, people whispered, stared, as if he were a part of the scandal himself. He wanted to disappear, to escape the constant scrutiny. But more than that, he was grappling with his feelings about Nicholas. Part of him felt vindicated, satisfied that the man who had caused so much pain was finally facing the consequences. But another part of him, a part he wasn't ready to acknowledge, felt a flicker of pity. Nicholas was still his father, after all, no matter how much he wished otherwise. Sarah watched her son struggle, her heart aching for him. She had tried to shield him from this, tried to protect him from the harsh realities of the world. But now, all she could do was stand by and offer her support. "I'm proud of you, Ethan," she told him one evening as they sat in the quiet of their living room. You stood up for yourself, for us. You did what you needed to do." Ethan nodded, but his eyes were distant, his thoughts elsewhere. "I don't know what to feel, Mom," he admitted, his voice raw with emotion. "I wanted him to pay, but now that he has, it doesn't feel like I thought it would." The fallout from the scandal continued to ripple through their lives. Sarah received messages from old acquaintances, people she hadn't spoken to in years, offering sympathy, curiosity thinly veiled behind their concern. "Are you okay?" they asked, but she knew what they really wanted to know. They wanted the inside scoop, the juicy details. Sarah ignored them all. She had no interest in rehashing the past, in reliving the pain. All she cared about was helping Ethan heal, helping him find a way to move forward. But she knew it wouldn't be easy. The scars Nicholas had left ran deep. As the weeks turned into months, Nicholas's life continued to unravel. He lost his home, his assets frozen as part of the fallout from the scandal. He moved into a modest apartment, a far cry from the luxury he was accustomed to. Each day was a new humiliation, a reminder of how far he had fallen. The people who once clamored for his attention now avoided him like the plague. "How the mighty have fallen," he thought bitterly, staring at the empty walls of his new home. He had never felt so alone, so utterly defeated. This was his punishment, he supposed. This was the price he had to pay. But even in his darkest moments, Nicholas couldn't shake the hope that one day, things might be different. He began attending therapy, trying to unravel the mess he had made of his life. He volunteered at a local shelter, trying to find some semblance of purpose. "It's not about redemption," his therapist told him. "It's about understanding. Understanding why you did what you did, and finding a way to move forward." Nicholas nodded, but the path ahead seemed impossibly long, the burden of his guilt almost too heavy to bear. He didn't know if he could ever make things right, but he knew he had to try. Ethan, too, was on a journey of healing. He threw himself into his work, trying to carve out a future for himself separate from his father's shadow. It wasn't easy. The name Brooks still carried a stigma, a reminder of the scandal that had rocked their lives. But Ethan was determined. He knew he couldn't change the past, but he could control his future. And so he worked, day after day, pushing himself to be better, to prove that he was more than just the son of Nicholas Brooks. He was his own person, with his own path to follow. And slowly, painfully, he began to find his way. One evening, months after the scandal had erupted, Ethan received a message from Nicholas. "I know I don't deserve it, but if you're ever ready to talk, I'll be here," it read. Ethan stared at the words, his emotions churning. He wasn't ready, not yet. But maybe one day he would be. He wasn't sure what the future held, wasn't sure if he could ever forgive Nicholas for what he had done. But as he looked out at the city lights, he felt a small, fragile sense of peace. Whatever happened, he would be okay. He had his mother, his life, his future. And for now, that was enough. For Nicholas, the road to redemption was a long and uncertain one. He didn't know if he would ever regain his family's trust, if he would ever be able to make up for the pain he had caused. But he was willing to try. He attended his therapy sessions, volunteered, and worked to rebuild his life piece by painful piece. It was a slow process, filled with setbacks and doubts. But for the first time in a long time, he felt like he was moving in the right direction. He didn't know what the future held, didn't know if he would ever get the chance to be a part of Ethan's life. But he hoped, and sometimes hope was all he had. In the aftermath of everything that had happened, Ethan found himself standing at a crossroads. The weight of the past still lingered, but there was also a sense of clarity, a feeling that he could finally start to build a life on his own terms. "It's not going to be easy," he told himself, looking out at the city skyline from his small apartment. But for the first time in what felt like forever, he wasn't defined by the shadows of Nicholas or the pain of his mother's silence. He was just Ethan, a young man with dreams and ambitions, ready to carve out a future that was entirely his own. Deciding to leave Pioneer Solutions had been a difficult choice, but a necessary one. The company was a constant reminder of everything he wanted to move past. "I need a fresh start," he explained to Sarah one evening, his voice steady and calm. She nodded, understanding completely. "You need to do what's best for you, Ethan. I'm proud of you." Her words, filled with love and support, were like a balm to his wounded spirit. He knew she had struggled too, that she carried her own burdens of guilt and regret. But they were both learning to let go, to forgive, and to look forward instead of back. With his decision made, Ethan began exploring new opportunities. He applied to different companies, eager to prove himself in a place where he wasn't known as the son of Nicholas Brooks. It wasn't easy. The name still carried weight, a stigma he couldn't entirely escape. But he refused to be discouraged. "Every no is just a step closer to the right yes," he reminded himself, channeling the perseverance his mother had shown him all those years. Each rejection only strengthened his resolve. He was determined to succeed, not to prove anything to anyone else, but to himself. Meanwhile, Sarah was also finding her own path to healing. She had spent so many years looking over her shoulder, afraid that the past would catch up with them, that she hadn't realized how much it had weighed her down. Now, with everything out in the open, she felt a strange, unexpected lightness. It wasn't that the pain was gone. Far from it. But it was no longer a secret she had to guard. She could finally breathe, finally focus on the future she wanted to build with Ethan. "We've come so far," she thought, smiling softly as she watched him prepare for yet another interview. "And we're only just beginning." Ethan's persistence paid off when he was offered a position at a startup company. It was a small firm, nothing like the grandeur of Pioneer Solutions, but it was exactly what he needed. The team was young, ambitious, and, most importantly, unaware of his family scandal. "This is your chance to build something new," he told himself as he walked into the office on his first day. The energy in the room was infectious, the excitement of being part of something new and innovative. It felt like the perfect place to start over, to prove that he was more than just his past. The work was challenging, but Ethan thrived. He poured himself into every project, every task, eager to show what he could do. His colleagues noticed his dedication, his drive. "You're a real asset to the team, Ethan," his manager said one day, clapping him on the back. The praise felt genuine, untainted by any knowledge of his family history. For the first time in a long time, he felt seen for who he was, not for the story that had followed him. It was a small victory, but it meant everything. "I can do this," he thought, a smile spreading across his face. "I can really do this." Sarah, too, found new purpose. She began volunteering at a local women's shelter, helping others who had faced difficult situations. It was healing, not just for them but for her as well. "You're stronger than you think," she would tell the women, her voice steady and sure. "I know because I've been where you are." Each story, each shared struggle, was a reminder of how far she had come, of the strength she had found within herself. She was no longer just a survivor of her past. She was someone who could use her experience to help others. It was a powerful realization, one that filled her with a sense of hope and purpose. The bond between Ethan and Sarah grew stronger as they navigated this new chapter of their lives. There were still difficult moments, still days when the weight of everything threatened to pull them down. But they faced it together, leaning on each other, finding strength in their shared journey. "We've been through so much," Sarah said one evening as they sat together on the couch, a comfortable silence between them. "And we've come out stronger." Ethan nodded, his heart swelling with gratitude and love. "I couldn't have done it without you, Mom," he said softly. "You're my rock." Nicholas, on the other hand, continued to struggle. He attended his therapy sessions, worked at the shelter, and tried to rebuild his life, one small step at a time. But the loneliness was crushing. Lisa and David had cut off all contact, and every day was a reminder of the family he had lost, the life he had destroyed. He wrote letters to Ethan, pouring out his heart, but he never sent them. "He needs time," he told himself, though the words felt hollow. He wasn't sure if he would ever be able to make things right, but he held on to the hope that one day his son would be willing to talk to him again. As the months passed, Ethan began to feel more at peace. The anger and pain that had consumed him were still there, but they no longer defined him. He was learning to let go, to forgive, not just Nicholas but himself as well. Holding on to all that anger, it's like carrying a weight that only hurts me, he realized one day. It wasn't easy, and there were times when the old wounds reopened, when the bitterness resurfaced. But he was healing, slowly but surely. He knew he still had a long way to go, but for the first time, he felt like he was on the right path. One afternoon, Ethan received a letter from Nicholas. It was different from the others, more heartfelt, more honest. "I don't expect your forgiveness," it read, "but I want you to know that I am trying to be a better person. For myself, and for you. If you're ever ready to talk, I'll be here." Ethan stared at the letter for a long time, his emotions swirling. He wasn't sure if he was ready, wasn't sure if he could face Nicholas again. But something had shifted inside him, a small crack in the wall he had built around his heart. Maybe, just maybe, he could find a way to let his father in. One step at a time. The day Ethan decided to respond to Nicholas's letter was a quiet one. He sat at his desk, pen in hand, his thoughts racing. What could he say? How could he put into words everything he felt? The anger, the hurt, the tentative hope. He took a deep breath and began to write. "I'm not sure if I'm ready to forgive you," he wrote, his hand trembling slightly. "But I'm willing to try. I think that's a start." The words were simple, but they carried the weight of everything he had been through. It wasn't a full reconciliation, but it was a beginning. And for now, that was enough. As Ethan sealed the letter and set it aside, he felt a sense of peace wash over him. The future was still uncertain, but he no longer felt trapped by the past. He looked around his apartment, at the life he had built for himself, and felt a swell of pride. He had faced so much, had come so far. And he knew, no matter what happened with Nicholas, no matter what challenges lay ahead, he would be okay. He had his mother, his strength, his courage. He had his own life, his own story to write. And as he stood by the window, looking out at the city below, he knew that this was just the beginning. For Sarah and Ethan, the journey was far from over. There would be more challenges, more moments of doubt and pain. But they had each other, and that was enough. They had learned to face the darkness together, to find light even in the most difficult times. And as they moved forward, step by step, they carried with them the lessons of their past, the strength they had found in each other. It wasn't a perfect ending, but it was theirs. And in the end, that was all that mattered. Now that you've seen how a single choice can ripple through lives, ask yourself, what decisions are you making today that might shape your future? It's not just about what Nicholas did to Sarah and Ethan. It's about the courage it takes to face our mistakes and the strength to change. Have you ever felt trapped by your past, or overwhelmed by the weight of secrets? Remember, true power comes not from hiding but from confronting and overcoming. Nicholas had everything: money, influence, power, but it meant nothing when he was forced to confront the reality of who he had become. It's a powerful reminder that no matter how much we try to control our lives, truth always finds a way to surface. And don't forget, Hit that subscribe button and ring the bell to be notified whenever we dive into stories that challenge, inspire, and transform. There's a whole world out there waiting to be explored, and I can't wait to share more with you. Until next time, stay strong, stay hopeful, and remember, every story has the power to change a life, including yours.